Hi, Ivo.
Hey,
Thank you for doing this interview with us. So the
pleasure.
first question I want to ask you is, this Muriel, how does it make you feel?
Well, it's very strange because it's obviously a very powerful piece of work and very strong. And in the past, I've thought that it's in a way a historical misrepresentation because the battle was not between the fascists and the demonstrators. It was between the police and the demonstrators. But so they're making it kind of symbolic, which I think is fine, and it's a very impressive piece of work, isn't it? But again, it's quite sort of angry kind of piece of work. I don't know really. What do you feel about it?
I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I do think
I
it's
think it's
amazing.
amazing. I think it's quite powerful.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
So people who are not political, how would you involve them to help them to have a better political understanding?
I'm a member of several political activist groups, and the fact is that in most of them, everybody's over 60. Political activism and younger people don't really seem to have sort of kind of melded together. Really, I don't know. Do you think I'm wrong about that?
I mean, I agree. I feel like young people, maybe they're not aware of how it really affects them or how to get involved. And it's hard sometimes to connect with it, to actually
Yes.
know what you can and can't do.
Right, I see. Yeah, the question should be answered, but I don't think it is being answered in a responsible way by anyone except me, because I'm writing a book about it.
Yeah. So what is that book going to be called?
Well, it's going to be called, I think, probably bank robbery, because the banks are the front men for the whole system of robbing ordinary working people. So that all the money and the profit from the work of ordinary people goes to people who do absolutely nothing except steal the profit from working people. And these 8 people who own more than half of the world, like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates. I mean, that's just the kind of tip of the iceberg, because the whole monetary and financial system is structured so that this goes on, and it's not very difficult to understand, but you can't get that published in any of the media, and so very few people understand it. And the other thing is that the people who do understand it are a pretty odd bunch, really, and they're quite they're very old, most of them, and they're quite doggedly opinionated. So there's no agreement among the people.
Knowing your grandfather's political stance, how did your father make sure you steered clear of his views?
Well, he had a row when Oswald Mosley came back into politics in the, I guess, late 50s, and he was again on a racist ticket, this time against black people, not Jews. My father went into his office. My father had a very bad stutter. He just died a few months ago. He had a very, very bad stutter. So I imagine he sort of stood there and sort of saying, you're behaving like a real shitbag. Okay. My grandfather looked up and said, "I will never see you again. You will leave the office. I will never see you again." So my father left the office, and for probably about 8 or 9 years, I think, I don't know the exact number, he didn't see him again. So the reunion I described earlier was 8 or 9 years later, and I didn't remember him. He was just a sort of cardboard cutout baddie, awful person, yeah.
So how was it like growing up in a family of Oswald?
With him actually it was quite tricky, because my father was obsessed. I don't know if you can imagine, but okay, so my father's mother died when he was, say, about 11, I think, and his aunt said to him, "Your father killed your mother with his bad treatment. Your mother died of misery." So he was left without a mother, with a father accused of murder, but actually, whatever it is, killing his mother. And then he had to then make his way in the world. But then Oswald he had this, not only this charm, but also kind of engaging intellect. So he would want to discuss these figures like Goethe and Nietzsche, these sort of giants of European philosophical tradition. And I think my father was quite seduced by that, but he was never seduced by the politics. My father fought in the Second World War against Hitler and got wounded and got a medal and all this stuff, so that was very good for him. But he was still engaged with his father in lots of ways, and it was very uneasy. So I had to put up with an awful lot of my father's complex sort of emotional, unraveling his own emotions, as did my older brother, and we, it was fairly strange. And then there was a lot of other stuff that was difficult to deal with, I guess, from that sort of background at that sort of time. But that's, I mean, everybody's got their problems.
Lastly, do you think something like this could ever happen again?
Well, look at Trump. I mean, what do you think? I mean, in England, I think, well, when you say something like this, what you're talking about is the defeat of fascism. I hope that the defeat of fascism can happen many times again in England. But, fascism in other countries is like a sort of horrible. There's some mythical monster that you cut off one head and it's another 6 sprout up. And I mean, is Trump a fascist? I mean, it's a matter of words. He is, really, isn't he? And what's happening in Europe is you keep on getting these edges toward people edging towards fascism, pulling back, edging towards. But I mean, if you look at Germany, leading up to Hitler, you've got all that happening. You've got sort of little bits of sort of semi-fascist people taking control, and then they get kicked out, and then the big one happens. So I think it is very worrying, and that's why I think we need some serious understanding of what the problems that are in the world, so that we don't get the absolute worst attempts at solving these problems that are just going to make everything much, much, much worse. That is, if we survive Trump versus Kim.
So I'd like to ask just more of a personal question. So how do you feel knowing that your grandfather played such an active role in the Battle of Cable Street? Like, did it make you angry? Did it make you upset? Like, personally, how did it make you feel?
Well, of course, this was a long time before I was born. So this was just one of his crimes. In a sense, this was a very odd episode, because what he actually did was, well, he wanted to march down here in order to provoke, to be provocative and to have violence. But then the police actually said he shouldn't, and he didn't. So the battle was all between the protesters and the police. So I think it was his, he was a bad person. He was irresponsible for the violence in the sense that he set up the situation. But I think there are so many much worse things that he did that this is one of a number of things, and I think he did a lot of other things that were much worse. So how do I feel about his role? Oh, there's another very strange fact. Is that he apparently, 2 days later, he went off to get married to his second wife, my step-grandmother, and in Goebbels' drawing room with Hitler present. And he didn't want to miss the plane, which is one of the reasons why he didn't want to get locked up. If he'd marched on Cable Street against the police's orders, he'd have been locked up, and he would have missed his wedding.
It's crazy, but then if you think about it, if he wasn't going to get married, maybe he wouldn't have listened to the police, and he might have carried on. If you look at it,
that may well be true. If that was my father's opinion always, is that if he hadn't had this wedding date, he would have, he would have marched and carried on. Maybe he'd been locked up, because he was locked up eventually in 1939, I think it was. So maybe he'd been locked up in 1936. But the main thing was, about maybe anything about Cable Street, is it's wonderful that community came together, resisted these thugs, and fascism was defeated in Britain for that time. And that's something to celebrate. That's great.